Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for our KeyBank workshop series titled New and Updated Connecticut Cyber Laws, including a reward for being proactive. We are so fortunate to have KeyBank sponsor these every month. And I'm going to toss this over to Abir, who's going to introduce today's speakers. Just know that this is going to be a very interactive panel discussion. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A at the bottom or the chat function. And Danielle Lee here and myself will monitor those throughout this session. Again, thank you so much for joining us. And over to you, Abir. And hey, I just found out, happy National Women's Day. So cheers to everyone on the call.
Good morning and happy International Women's Day. Welcome to the Chamber Small Business Workshop Series. My name is Abir Saad. It's an honor to represent KeyBank at today's session. KeyBank has been sponsoring these workshops for the Chamber for several years now because we see it as an extension of what we do for the financial wellness of our small business clients every day. As a branch manager, I work with small businesses in our community every day on ways they can effectively manage operations and grow their businesses. Our Small Business Financial Wellness Review is an award-winning review tool that helps us guide a conversation with business owners, helping them to identify goals and build a plan for business success. If after today's presentation, you're interested in learning more about KeyBank Small Business Solutions, I'd be happy to set up some time to speak with you. You can reach me either through the Chamber or at KeyBank in Old Saybrook. It is now my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Sherwin Yoder and Chris Wisniewski. Just to tell you a little bit about our speakers today. Sherwin practices in Carmody's litigation group, which was named highly recommended Connecticut litigation team in Benchmark Litigation's Guide to Leading Business Litigation Firms and Attorneys. As a certified privacy professional, Sherwin counsels clients in the areas of data privacy and cybersecurity. In cases of data security incidents or breaches involving disclosure of personal health, financial, and employment information, Sherwin has coached businesses and healthcare providers through the process of breach notification and responding to regulators. And we also have Chris Wisniewski. Chris has joined Whittlesey in 2019. He has more than 20 years of IT experience with a specialty in cybersecurity. He has significant experience with financial institutions, governmental agencies, nonprofit organizations, and closely held businesses. Without further ado, turn it over to you, Sherwin. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Abir. Nice to be with you all today in the Middlesex Chamber, and congrats to you who've signed up to learn a little bit about some reasons why you want to get your cybersecurity house in order and the financial benefits of that, obviously. So Chris is I'm going to ask Chris to project slides and we'll get started. And I'm not sure what the arrangements are for questions, but I'm happy to take questions as we go along. And I don't know, Abir, if you're going to moderate that or not, but I'm happy to answer those, or we can hold them to the end, whatever your custom is. So the subject is the new Connecticut cyber laws. Obviously, every year there are new privacy and data security related legislation, and last year was no exception. In October, a particular act came into being that we're going to talk about in a moment that incentivizes businesses to adopt written cybersecurity frameworks, policies, and procedures, and do it, annual assessments or periodic assessments, because it helps not only the businesses, but the state obviously has an interest in keeping the infrastructure secure and free from outsiders. So if Connecticut gets up to speed and is a harder nut to crack for the hackers and the criminals, frankly, they're mostly criminals, then they might move on to another state with more lax protocols. So kudos to you for joining in the fight and seeing how this could benefit you. Another law that we'll talk about is the expansion of the Connecticut data breach notification law. So Chris, just go ahead and advance to the next slide and we'll get a snapshot of those two laws after our mugshots. There you go. Yeah, before we do that, let me just take us a step backward and talk about the trend, because it used to be when we would present, businesses would have a hard time understanding why would this impact them. Aren't the bad guys going after the Home Depots, the Targets, the big boys that we see in the news? And sadly, that's not the case. Small, medium-sized businesses are the prime targets. They're the most impacted. They're the least able, to have funds to be able to bounce back from a cyber attack, and they're also low-hanging fruit compared to the so-called big boys, because they don't have a lot of the security protocols, controls, practices, and just general awareness that is generated within the cultures of those big companies. So small, medium-sized businesses are prime targets. And we've seen that in spades during the pandemic, right? I mean, the ransomware statistics are literally through the roof. Every quarter, it seems like double and even triple digit increases in terms of the size, the number of the attacks, the amount of dollars, or in terms of cryptocurrency, that they're asking for to be able to liberate your data and restore your business. It's just gone through the roof because so many people are remote, and they're getting success. So the more success they get, the more payments that are made to the ransomware attackers, the more the demand goes up and the higher the demands and the more frequent the attacks. So states and federal governments are ratcheting up their efforts to require businesses to take affirmative steps to think about privacy and data security and to keep the bad guys out. California was the first state to pass a comprehensive data privacy law. And what I mean by that is that's different from a data breach law that really has been designed primarily to protect financial data, social security numbers, driver's licenses, government IDs and credit card numbers, and things that could be used by identity thieves to open accounts and commit fraud. Comprehensive data privacy laws go much further than that and actually recognize that people have, human beings have sort of innate rights in the data that's out there about them or about their household, and should have some control in and say in what companies do with that data, whether they can market with it, whether they can use their personal information, health information, financial information, education information to make profit, or to benefit some other way that might even be adverse to people. So, Cambridge Analytica a couple years ago was a big issue precisely because Europe had a comprehensive, or now has a comprehensive, data privacy law called the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR. And believe it or not, a fair number of businesses here in Connecticut are impacted by that regulation, and I counsel clients, many of whom are tech providers and service providers, or maybe they're schools, but in any case, they have constituencies or markets in Europe and need to come into compliance with the GDPR. So these comprehensive laws provide a list of rights, for the everyday citizen, rights to know what a company has about them, rights to access that data, rights to review it, correct it, to have a copy of it, to take it with them and request that you as a company delete all the information that you have about them to the extent it's not legally required. There are affirmative obligations of implementing cybersecurity controls, acknowledging that cybersecurity is, hand in hand with privacy and being able to lock down personal information and protect it from unauthorized access. So these comprehensive laws are coming to a state near you. It started in California, it started in Europe, let's say. other countries, Japan, in South America as well, Brazil. A number of countries now have comprehensive consumer privacy laws, or just not even consumer, just privacy laws that impact a person, a living person within their jurisdiction, regardless of their business relationships. And California, and then more recently, Virginia and Colorado. Now, Virginia and Colorado aren't quite as to the left as the if you bear with me with that analogy, as California. The rights of citizens are a little more balanced against the needs of business and government and so forth. And I'm not going to get into the details of that. That's not today's presentation. I'm happy to chat with folks offline if you want to discuss that. But now Utah's on board. They just passed this month their first comprehensive Consumer Privacy Act, and Connecticut has had a law the last 3 years, and including this legislative session. I don't know if it'll pass. Last year it died. Really on the Senate floor, I think. It had already gone through several committees and was ready, to be voted, but didn't get taken up. So I don't know if that's going to happen, but knowing what I know about the law right now, it's sort of in between Virginia and California. So slightly more geared toward the consumer or the individual than maybe the Virginia law. And then federally, the federal government perennially has, a dozen or more privacy bills pending that never get passed for a couple of reasons. But those reasons are becoming, as more and more states' laws multiply, and businesses are having to comply in all those markets, and they look to Congress to come up with a uniform solution. You can imagine that soon enough we'll have a federal, or at least the privacy professionals' hope is that we'll have a federal law. So next slide, Chris. So that's the trend. Connecticut hasn't quite followed suit yet on the comprehensive consumer strategy, but they're taking another strategy. And I've sort of described last year's legislation as the stick and the carrot. So the stick is that expansion of the definition of personal information that could trigger a data breach if that information is has unauthorized access or somehow compromised. And that comes with it certain enforcement mechanisms that can be expensive and bring reputational harm to a business. But the carrot is there too, in that they're one of a couple of, or 3 states so far that I know of, who have actually incentivized the adoption of written cybersecurity frameworks. So whereas in Massachusetts or maybe in California or New York, certain businesses, and even in Connecticut, certain industries are required to do this. Even though some laws affirmatively require written cybersecurity frameworks or information security programs, or WISPs, written information security programs. In Connecticut, in terms of the broad business landscape and not just particular businesses, at least this first step is to create incentives for businesses to do so. And so we'll talk about that in a moment too. So next slide. So the carrot is this Public Act 2159. It expands Connecticut General Statute 36A 701B. You don't need to remember that. Just know that's the data breach law. So that's the law that says when I, as a company, have a hack or an employee inadvertently compromises or sends to the outside personal information as defined in the statute, then I might have certain obligations to notify those individuals whose information was put out there. And I might even, in the case of their social security numbers being exposed, I might need to buy them 2 years worth of credit monitoring and identity theft mitigation services. And those can be expensive. So you have a breach of 100 people, and those records included social security numbers. you might be spending $70 a pop, just roughly estimating, to buy them that 2 years worth of coverage. So 70 times 100, you see that. But you're also spending some money on the forensic investigator to make sure that you have a data breach or that you don't. And, you know, if Chris Wisniewski from Whittlesley comes to me and says, good news, that there was no personal information in the email box that was compromised, then that's it. That's the limit of your expense, whatever Chris's bill and my bill might have been to that point.
And Sherwin, I was just going to jump in just to even say,
Yeah.
you know, that's a good point, right? Because I think at the end of the day, a lot of people probably want to know, am I talking about $3,000, $300,000? It's all relative, you know, but even our piece on the forensics end, out of the box, we're talking the first day or two is like an automatic 5,000 to 7,000. And then if we get into the forensics, you could probably add another 15,000 to 20,000. So it adds up very quickly, and that's not even dealing with Sherwin's side of things of the privacy information, the reporting, all that stuff. So these are very costly to small to medium-sized businesses. It's not just the overlying, Yeah,
and the rule of thumb. Thank you, Chris, for sharing that. The rule of thumb is, you know, it used to be like $150 per record for a person, you know, whose record was compromised in terms of estimating the expense of the breach. But it depends on the type of information. It could be 200, 300. I haven't seen last year's numbers, but it kind of depends on what type of information it is too. It varies. Health information can sometimes be pretty valuable. The financial stuff is valuable too, but there's more of it, and there's been more breaches of it, so it's probably more plentiful. In any case, think about that. Think about, as we talk today, think about the costs of dealing with these breach and compare that to the cost that you might have to spend proactively to prevent or mitigate against a breach or similar. You know, there are other harms you can imagine. You can imagine lawsuits, for example, from one of those people whose information was breached, or God forbid, you know, someone uses your business to send malware to another company, disrupting them and, you know, losing them profits and so forth, or causing damage to their systems. There are lawsuits that might hold you accountable for those damages too. So, all right, I'm just going to depress you a little bit more to talk about this stick, and then we'll get to the incentives. Okay, so hang in there. All right, so as of October 1st, this is the list, and you'll have a copy of these slides, I believe. This is the list of what's considered personal information. So obviously Social Security number, driver's license, all that stuff I mentioned before, but now there's a whole bunch of other things: medical information, health and health insurance, you know, policy information, biometric information. So anything that about a person's body that's used to identify them, that is biometric information. That is personal information and protected under the statute. Online account login. So if you are a business with an e-commerce shop, or you have some functionality on a web portal or whatever, and you're collecting, you know, passwords and making user profiles, that information is now protected personal information. Passports, military ID, government IDs. The individual taxpayer identification number is new, and it's also important because it's up there with Social Security numbers. So if you have a breach of a Social Security number, you had to do the credit monitoring services. Same thing with the taxpayer identification numbers. If you have any individual taxpayer identification numbers, those are going to be considered like SSNs. They're going to trigger that credit monitoring, 24 months of credit monitoring, complimentary, you know, provided by the entity that was breached. Next slide, Chris. Thank you. So just some additional things to keep in mind. We used to have a 90-day notification timeline. So from the time that the business discovers a breach until 60 days from there, that's how long you have to notify affected individuals. And Chris can attest that that's a very short time, you know, to complete the forensics, to search through all that unstructured data that might have been in an email inbox or in attachments and so forth, to find what is the personal information that could have been exposed. So it used to be 90 days, now it's 60. And in fact, keep in mind that the actual wording is a reasonable time or without undue delay. So if it's reasonable for you to know whom to identify before the 60 days is up, the statute requires you to do that before the 60 days. So just 60 days is the maximum. All right. Free 2-year identity theft services. We talked about that for the Social Security number, the taxpayer ID, special treatment of online account login breaches. So you can't do a notification through the email that's been compromised, for example, or through the account mechanism that's been compromised. You have to do it some other way because we'll assume that that account has been compromised. Coordinating overlapping HIPAA breach notification. So if you're a business, that's a business associate of a HIPAA covered entity, a healthcare provider or health insurer or whatever it might be who's covered by HIPAA, then just know that they have these obligations, and so probably you do too. However, if you're complying with the HIPAA breach notification rule, Connecticut says that's good enough for us. That counts as compliance for Connecticut's purposes, with a few minor differences that I don't want to get into here. One good news is if you hire Chris or someone like him and you do a forensic report and the Attorney General asks for it, this act makes clear that that's going to be kept confidential. It's not going to become part of the public record. People can't ask for that through a FOIA request. It's going to be protected. And they want to do that because they want to encourage businesses to share with the Attorney General what the investigation has shown, so that they can protect the state, so that they can assemble all the information that comes from different breaches and look at it together and see patterns and work with law enforcement to correct situations and things like that. So they want to incentivize information sharing with the state. Next slide. The carrot is pretty simple. I know the implementation may not be or may seem daunting to you, but the idea is this. Any business, nonprofit or for-profit, is covered. And it protects you in the event of a lawsuit that comes along and says, you were lax with your security safeguards. My identity was stolen because of a data breach that happened on your watch, or I got malware, whatever it might be. But this law says if the business has a written cybersecurity framework that complies and is up to date with the particular framework that you've adopted, then you're going to be immune from a claim of punitive damages. And that's where you get the multipliers, the 2 times or 3x times whatever the actual damages the plaintiff can prove. Punitive damages multiplies that typically. So if you can demonstrate that you've got that adopted framework and you're compliant within the last 6 months, you've got the most recent amendments or changes to that framework current through the last 6 months, then you're going to be protected. It's a safe harbor is another term that you might hear used to describe this program. Next slide. These are it's a snapshot of the frameworks that we're talking about. So it's not like you can go to cybersecurityframework.com and download a template and just start, saying you've adopted a framework. The statute specifies certain frameworks that you have to use. So typically a business will if they don't have somebody in-house, who's knowledgeable about those frameworks, they'll hire someone who can advise them, who can assess them, prepare them to put in those controls, over whatever the timeline that it works for the business, and put those into action so that you can document that and say you've got the framework. I'm not going to go into the differences. I don't even think Chris has time to go into those differences, but I'm sure that he could describe to you the differences, in some other time. So what if I'm already complying with a cybersecurity regulation? You say, I am one of those HIPAA business associates, or I work for banks, or I am a bank, and I have to comply with Graham-Leach-Bliley or something like that. Next slide. Then those count too. So if you're complying with those programs, the statute wants to incentivize that and reward you for doing that compliance, keeping up to date, having a written documentation. The reference to PCI DSS, you credit card merchants probably are familiar with that by now, and maybe you should pay more attention to it and make sure that you've implemented all of the things that the PCI DSS or payment card industry data security standard require in terms of controls, so that you can say that you too are protected from punitive damages. Yeah, keep your program updated, or you'll lose your immunity, basically. Chris, is there any other slide for me there? Okay, this I think we're using an old slide deck, despite our efforts to have it updated. So what to do before October 1st? Obviously, we're past October 1st of 2021. Still, there was no deadline to start complying. It's just you're not benefiting from it yet. So go ahead, take stock of what data you have. Do your data mapping and your inventory. Look at where your personal information is. How are we treating it? Get somebody to assess. Do a cybersecurity assessment. Update your policies and procedures. That's something that I frequently work with clients on, in terms of the compliance with data privacy laws. Update your incident response plan. That's critical. The response plan is your roadmap. When the employee comes to you and says, my computer's frozen and there's a skull and crossbones on the screen demanding Bitcoin, having a plan in place will really bring down your blood pressure on that day, and lower whatever risks that flow from that. Make sure you're reviewing your third-party provider contracts, and that's another aspect of those comprehensive consumer privacy laws that I didn't mention. Is they recognize that businesses partner with vendors and subcontractors, service providers to process personal data for different solutions, and they want to make sure, the regulators want to make sure that you are forcing your subcontractor contractually to do the same things that you're required to do in order to comply with the security and privacy laws. So making sure that you can enforce what you're doing, what your obligations are, what your risks are, down to the subcontractor is important, to make sure you have the right privacy and data security addenda attached to the agreement. The service provider agreement, for example, or the agreement itself addresses what happens in the event of a data breach and who owns the data, what they're allowed to do with it. They can't sell it to third parties and that kind of thing, making that clear. And obviously with the cost of a data breach, you really want to make sure that you've got the right coverage. And that's not the topic of today's program. I'm sure the Chamber, if it hasn't already, will organize some cybersecurity coverage programs for you. But it's a complicated area, and you really need a trusted broker who has not just your longtime broker, but someone who actually has knowledge of cybersecurity coverage. I think that's it for me, Chris. So why don't I turn it over to you?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for kind of going over that. I know that's pretty comprehensive, and we just threw a lot of information at you guys. Before I get into my piece, I guess I would just take a second and ask, are there any questions thus far? I think as we kind of laid out in the beginning, I'd rather this be interactive. If you have questions, please ask. You're not interrupting. Yes, we're trying to relay information, but it's also helpful that, if there are questions that come along, we can kind of address them and talk through them. So, I want it to be somewhat interactive as opposed to Sherwin and I just talking at you. So I don't know, are there any questions at all? Okay, I can hop into my piece of things. Let's make sure. Yep. So, as Sherwin talked about.
Chris, before you start, it's Danielle. Yeah. Lauren Middleton just did send in a question. What type of liability insurance do you recommend for protection against data breaches?
So that's actually, might as well just talk about that. So one of the biggest things that I see a lack of, especially in small to medium-sized businesses and even in municipalities, we're not seeing folks get cyber liability insurance until after the fact. And, to put it very simply, we just had a firm of 16 people. At the end of the day, the breach cost them pretty much over $300,000 out of pocket. And that was a small ransomware. We had another lawyer firm, very small. It was a lawyer, a paralegal, and just the admin, the three of them. That ended up costing $90,000 out of pocket. I would say probably 75 to 80% of the breaches and incidents we work on, these organizations don't have cyber insurance. It's extremely costly. For the amount that you can get it now, it's a no-brainer. And you'll get coverage up to $1 million and things like that. So I'm awfully leery on recommending a company just because it all depends on the size and what your need is. The big ones, obviously, you have your Travelers, the Hartford, Beasley, Hartford Steam Boiler Insurance Company. That's where I came from. I was the interim information security officer for a while there. And that's kind of where cybersecurity insurance started, but it's improved over the years. The one thing I will say about cyber liability insurance is it's becoming a little more expensive. And the reason being is claims are going through the roof. Sherwin had indicated, we're seeing these incidents increase immensely. Phishing emails, for instance, since COVID started, has risen 666% in less than 2 years. That's just an insane amount. So we're seeing huge issues with claims going up. So obviously premiums are going to go up. It's nothing that's out of the box crazy. For small businesses, you may pay $1,500 to $2,000 a year. But I'm pretty sure you'd rather pay that than $300,000. So it's something to certainly consider. If there are questions about that, we do review. We'll see if we can help guide you. And one of the things that we did recently was put out a little comprehensive complimentary thing that we will do is we'll look at your security questionnaires. So what's happening is with cyber insurance, before you just get a checklist, you can check every box, they give you insurance. Now they're becoming so stringent on what you have to have in place for security controls that if you don't have them, they're not going to consider you. We've even had carriers that have been with somebody for 10 years have to reassess their security, and because they were lacking something, actually got dropped. So, there are things preventative that have to be in place for you to be able to gain cybersecurity insurance as it's becoming more intense, I guess, so to speak. And that's kind of a topic in itself. And, at the end, I hope our contact information is in here, I'm pretty sure. But if anyone has any questions whatsoever, please don't ever hesitate to reach out. That's why Sherwin and I are here. We'd rather, yeah.
No, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, go right ahead.
I just wanted to take a crack at Lauren's, contribute to Lauren's question there too. Which coverage, as you've surmised from Chris's remarks, is really kind of individual and dependent upon what's your risk profile. So what types of data you have, what kind of business you have. Are you a service provider, for example, or are you the owner of the data? So those types of questions will matter. There are no uniform underwriting principles yet for cyber coverage. It's all a la carte. A lot of the coverages are sublimited to control the risk. So you just got to work with somebody to understand what is your what's the worst things that could happen and how much it could cost. You heard some of those costs that Chris just mentioned. But I would say at a minimum, any business will want to have first-party coverages for data breach, to handle those breach notification expenses, engaging an attorney, engaging forensic investigation services, and also make sure it covers cyber extortion or ransomware. Because if you have to pay a ransomware payment, those can be staggering now and debilitating. And insurance companies also have engaged, panel experts who can negotiate, whose sole job is to negotiate with the ransom attacker, and they build profiles on these people just because the volume of negotiations they've done. and they can sort of make recommendations about whether to pay or not pay, or how much they think we can go down on the demand. So having an insurance policy that covers ransomware, I think, is critical these days. And then your third-party coverage too. You know, network security liability, I think, is pretty common. Privacy liability, and that's the third-party data breach costs in case somebody sues you, and then regulatory costs related to that. So you might have to answer to the Attorney General or some other regulator in an investigation that may end up in a fine or something like that too. So you want to have those regulatory defense costs as well. There are probably some others, and maybe more specific to your particular business, Lauren, or those who are listening, but it's just a few things to keep in mind. Thanks, Chris.
Yep. So I have like 5 minutes to zip through my slides here. So I'm going to do my best to try and hit what I can and leave some time.
Are we
questions.
going till 10:30?
Is it 10:30? I thought it was 10. Do we have till 10:30?
If you guys go over a little bit, it's completely fine. So
But over what?
You guys have until 10:30, but if you guys
Okay, that's what I
extend it a
thought.
little more, it's fine.
Oh.
The invitation was.
That's beautiful. Look out. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. So as we jump in, you know, one of the things you heard about is one of these, you know, key things is a written information security program, or what if I have an information risk program, cybersecurity program? It's called a bunch of different things, right? It's just like anything else. There's multiple labels. However, at the end of the day, really what that program is, and I'll, on my next slide, talk a little bit about what's in there and what key components are. It is an overarching cyber security program that's made to address your risk. What cyber risk do you have? What security controls are in place to protect those? And that's where we talk about the CIA triangle there, the confidentiality of the data, making sure it stays secure, the integrity, making sure it's not altered or changed. Obviously, the availability, if there's an outage, can you continue to have business resumption for both you and your clients without having anything compromised? So your program overall includes a lot of different components. And so, you know, as we talk through that, I'll hit what the key policies are, the key procedures are, and, you know, we can make sure that we cover those. So some good effective measures that we really want to have as part of the program, looking at this, you know, administratively, is governance, right? So if we're looking at this, your organization, whether it's a municipality, whether it's a bank, I know there's some fire departments on it, you name it, you're going to have a different set of eyes looking at different risks. But it's important to have IT governance that's constantly evaluating that and looking at that. What is my risk? What data do I have? Where am I vulnerable? Am I housing information that contains protected health information or federal tax information? Or we talked about some of that PII, personally identifiable information. Am I sharing it externally? Am I doing things with a third-party cloud? So having that governance that evaluates and is reviewing that and addressing that, you know, throughout the year is extremely important. And the important thing there is, let's make sure that you have stakeholders, right? So it's one thing if, you know, you have one or two people that are really on board, but having, you know, we'd call C-level executives or whoever are your executive directors. For some of you, if there's commissioners for a district, need to have them on board that's understanding the risk, because obviously it comes top down. So the other thing is looking at threat intelligence and collaboration. What kind of internal and external resources are available? What kind of collaboration do you have? One of the things, I sit on a couple different organizations, but you know, we have what's called Hartford Scan. So a bunch of businesses in Hartford, we talk about all the time different incidents, security vulnerabilities, even physical security stuff that's going on. And it comprises of many different profits, nonprofits, banks, you know, these large insurance companies, our firms, the fire departments, police departments, and it's a great way to collaborate and work off each other to make aware of new things that come out. So, for instance, I'm not sure if it made the news yet, but there's a new massive vulnerability in Linux software that came out, kind of was exposed April of 2021, but now it's finally just being executed, and it just came to light in the last day or two, right? It's called Dirty Pipe. And so it affects all Android phones. So your Android phone, without getting too technical, can get rooted and wiped and data stolen. And it affects 1,200 apps that are on phones. So I'm sure if people have, Android phones, that most likely you're going to have one of those apps on your phone. And it makes you vulnerable. So yes, there are patches for that. I don't want to get too far off topic, but this just came out. We just shared this in the group. So there's really important that you have areas that you collaborate and share information and talk about. I know some organizations are scared to talk about a security incident they might have had. Maybe they think it makes them look poor or reputation-wise. But this day and age, the amount of security incident and breaches that go on are just exponential. And so maybe sharing about some of your experiences could help other organizations of your type or anything like that understand how to protect against. So it's an educational thing. We talk about third-party service providers and vendor risk management. Lauren, I know you were saying in web development there. That's where we talk about a big focus now is third-party service providers. So if you're doing work, let's say you're using Microsoft Office 365. 95% of the time, you're not going to have a local Exchange server. You may, but the whole purpose of Office 365 is it's sitting up in the cloud. So Microsoft is hosting your data. So they're a third party that has your data up in the cloud. There should be some kind of risk assessment done and looking at that vendor to make sure that they are, keeping your data secure and they have controls in place to protect your information so that it doesn't get breached. And if it is breached, what are their steps to notify, remediate, things like that? These big third-party providers have what's called SOC reports, Service Organizational Control Reports. And basically, it is a industry standard audit that has all of the key security areas that an organization that holds your data needs to be evaluated on. The importance is that report will be made to you as a client, and it's really important you're looking at that on an annual basis, because what happens is if there is a deficiency or a finding, they have to disclose that. They can't hide that and bury that. You are going to be made aware of that. And in that report is this little piece called entity user controls. What that says is Microsoft is saying you need to make sure that you're doing X, Y, Z to be in compliance with what we're doing. So there's some work on your end you need to be doing as well. But it's really important to look at these and understand, what risk does your vendor put? We talk about supply chain. There's been a bunch of breaches in the last year or two that were caused because of the third-party provider. So it wasn't necessarily you as the client, but who you're taking services from got breached, and it kind of runs down the pipeline. So this is becoming a very, very important piece now that we're doing a lot of cloud stuff and going third party. And if you house that data, that's something that you should be evaluating. Am I at risk to my clients? I know for when we talk with HIPAA related things, there's BAAs, business associate agreements that are in place with clients that basically spell out, hey, if you have my information, here's how you're going to protect it. And if there's a breach, you have to notify us. So there's agreements like that that are important. When we move down to incident response and resilience, I think Sherwin touched on that, right? Nowadays, it's a sad way to approach it, but it's not if, it's when it's going to happen. You see the large breaches in the news because they're big. Connecticut infrastructure, just infrastructure in the state of Connecticut, on a daily basis, there are over 10 million attacks on these industries. Not successful, but that is the influx of what's happening, right? We're just seeing these things rise exponentially, and unfortunately, you can't look at it after the fact of, oh my gosh, we have ransomware, we're shut down, now we don't know what to do. No, you need to have a plan in place. You need to understand what you're doing if that happens. And once it does, what are you going to do to remediate it? So having these key areas in your cybersecurity program is very, very important, right? And so I know that, I'm not getting into these. If you think it's boring, I have to read these, which is even worse, okay? So these frameworks are your industry standard. These are all very big. Obviously, PCI is along credit cards, Graham-Leach-Bliley Act for your banks, financial institutions, things like that. HIPAA, we understand. But basically your NIST is usually the overarching framework that if you're following that, it's going to fall under everything else. That goes across the board. That spells out, all of your security controls you should have in place. Again, it's scalable. We don't expect, a 12-person organization to have the 117 controls. It's just not appropriate. So as law states, you have to kind of abide by one of these frameworks. This is, a bunch of examples of what out there for industry standard. And so making sure you align under one of those allows you to comply with the new Connecticut laws and ensures that the security controls are appropriate. So that's why they kind of lay those out. I'll spend a little time on this slide. As I said, what are the key components? Here's what we're looking at, right? So what does a good cybersecurity program contain? So you have your overarching document, your information security program document that says, here's the purpose of it, here's why we're doing it, here's the laws we comply with. People think that, well, I do business in Connecticut, that's good, that's all I have to deal with. If you happen to have any information from somebody in California, Massachusetts, Utah, you get where I'm going with this. We're not going to hit all 50 states. But if you have information from clients that could be sensitive from any of the other states, you are responsible to comply with their privacy laws. So let's just say if, New York, their New York DFS law, if there's some kind of incident or breach at your company and you have New York residents' information, you have 72 hours to report that to the Department of Financial Services. So there's reporting regulations that you need to comply with. So it's important that you understand that as well. Acceptable use policy. Most companies have this. This basically is your employee handbook. I know there's probably different names for some of these, but your employee handbook, it outlines what your employees' responsibilities are. Maybe even talks about what disciplinary action is there if you violate any of these policies and what you do there. So what I try and point out is the key pieces that you should be sharing with every employee that you have on an annual basis is that overarching information security program document and your acceptable use policy. They should be reviewing it and signing off on it and making sure that they understand what their responsibilities are. Because if you don't do that, then you're setting your employees up for failure, right? And how can you hold them liable if you never really share them anything, or, any of these documents or policies? The next two kind of go hand in hand: a disaster recovery plan and business continuity plan. Again, these don't need to be 60 pages. They're scalable, but you got to have something in place. The disaster recovery plan is just that, a DR plan. What happens in a disaster? We think back to 2011, I want to say. We had the ice storm that affected the whole state, and it went on for a week. A lot of businesses couldn't get into work. They couldn't get to their servers. They didn't know how to log in remotely. It was a huge issue. Had they had a disaster recovery plan to address this and understand this is what we're going to do in that place, would have alleviated a lot of this. I think of, for me, outside of here, I'm also a firefighter, but well, I was. In any event, I think of that ice storm. There were actually businesses that we had to respond to and go to that they didn't really think about the fact that, okay, I have a generator. Well, how long can you run for? And oh, by the way, none of your oil trucks can get on the road. So you didn't have any policies in place that, ensure that you can refill your generators in the event of this emergency. So they lost power and lost data. So there's things like that you kind of have to pay attention to a disaster recovery plan. Business continuity. Business continuity plan, there we go. Business continuity plan talks about how we're going to keep business going. What's our resumption? What's our acceptable risk to be down? So if we do have that, the building catches on fire and we can't get in there, how am I going to continue to run my bank? How am I going to continue to allow clients and customers to access their information that they need? So that business continuity plan lays that out. Who are the key players? What's our contact list? How do we get a hold of people and alert them in this situation? So those kind of go hand in hand and are very important. Next is our incident response plan. We talk about what's the difference between a disaster recovery and an incident response. Disaster recovery is more of, man-made, physical disasters. The incident response lays out, here's what you need to do if you have a network interruption, if you have ransomware, a virus, if there's anything that is, taking over your system that stops your business from a standpoint of the network. Now we have an incident response plan. Okay, we got hit with ransomware. What do we do? Who do we call? What am I supposed to do for reporting? All this is laid out in your incident response plan. And this is becoming more and more mandatory, we see in a lot of the state privacy statutes, that you have to have this in place. Security awareness program. If anybody ever asks me, hey, Chris, what am I supposed to do as far as security? We don't have a lot of money. If there's anything you do at the end of the day, it's security awareness. You've got to educate your people. You've got to educate yourselves. As I said, phishing went up 666%. Okay. A lot of people will pitch that, oh, well, you have your firewalls in place and we have the email spam filters and things like that. And then your employees are the last line of defense. I would argue it's just the opposite. Your employees are sometimes the first line of defense. They're the ones that are going to see this information. They're the ones that get that phone call and say, this doesn't sound right. This doesn't sound legit. Or, this email, why am I doing a $5,000 wire transfer? Well, as part of your cyber awareness program, you're doing phishing tests. You're doing ongoing phishing campaigns or small security modules to educate your employees and make them aware of what's going on. Very, very important piece right here, big time. I talked a little bit about the vendor management program on the last slide, so I won't belabor that. And then you see that kind of in bold, data classification policy. We are seeing this more and more important, right? As I talk, Sherwin, can you see I see 4 chats up there. Can you see those or no? I just didn't know because
I got Q&A. Let me see here. Yeah. So one of the questions was, I
can actually pull it up.
where'd they go? Well, there was just a question now about is NIST cybersecurity framework recognized in the safe harbor statute, and I answered that in the affirmative, that's one of the publications specifically referenced in the statute.
And then somebody wrote back to Lauren. Okay. And then Sherwin, I saw you wrote back. Okay. I just see them popping up top, and like I said, to be interactive, I wanted to make sure we were addressing questions as they come up. Thank you.
Yeah.
So data classification policy. This is becoming more and more important, and this is something we're seeing because we do incident response so much. if you don't know what data you have no idea what your cyber risk is, right? So, looking at this, it's important to classify your data. It's important to identify your data. It's important to see where is the data held, okay? We see breaches all the time where a mailbox gets compromised. And, the company tells us, well, we don't have anything, so it's no big deal. I have never in my life seen, of the hundreds of breaches we've done, when we scan a mailbox, that there isn't some sort of PII or PHI or that federal tax information. Something always comes up because people don't have good email hygiene. We just worked on a breach recently that was ransomware, and unfortunately, the backup device got ransomed as well, and it was a disaster. And the problem there was, once we kind of remediated and got the bad hackers out of the system, the next thing is to look at data and say, all right, what could have been compromised? What could have been taken? They didn't even know where or what was on their servers. And, this was a elder care provider, all right? And so they had no idea what was out there. So they don't know or produce how many of their client information could have been taken through, HIPAA-related documentation. It's important that you absolutely identify that data, because that's going to drive what's your cyber risk rating here. What are we looking at? How much am I at risk? So understanding that is so key to really push forward in protecting yourselves. It's also important you have to have a privacy officer that is responsible for this program. Somebody needs to be able to say, I'm responsible for this. I'm reviewing it annually. There's sign off, there's proof that, hey, we did a review this year, here it is, or if there's any changes, you include it right in the document. We updated this piece, or we added the new safe harbor laws for Connecticut. We put those in the document. So it's very, very important that you have that identified as a piece of this. Okay. We talked a little bit about that incident response plan. The key thing here is making sure that you address the different areas, right? Like Sherwin said in the liability insurance, it's important to point out some insurance coverages I've looked at are 20 pages long, and find out they actually don't have coverage for ransomware, which is probably one of the most prominent things that really could affect a huge, set of circumstances. So, we talk about addressing cybercrime, data loss. That's another thing is important as part of your incident response plan. It's probably good to say, incorporate a piece of relating to your data classification policy. So what data is at risk. If this happens, where do we house this data? What could be breached? So it's very important to kind of have that stand out as part of your incident response plan. Okay. So I talked a little bit about the security awareness program. Again, I don't want to belabor this too much, but just making sure that you are doing ongoing training, specifically new hires. Make sure that if you have to be in compliance, are you doing compliance training? A lot of your programs now can incorporate the Connecticut sexual harassment that is required every year. Are you doing any kind of proficiency test? If you don't know how your folks are doing, then you really are not aware of feeling a pulse of your employees. When the industry standard for a bank is 3.4% of your organization would actually click or open a phishing email, and you do an assessment and find out you're at 46%, I probably wouldn't sleep at night, but you need to understand where you're at, where are your risks. Do I have repeat offenders that are failing this? They should be doing remedial training to help bring them up to speed, because all it takes is one person. That's it, and it could take down a company. So as we get towards the end here, one of the things that I will just touch on is cybersecurity best practices, right?
Hey, Chris.
Yep.
It might be a good point for me to emphasize something, two things you just went through.
Go ahead. Sure.
Just from the legal perspective, folks, the importance of having a written policy and procedure just can't be overstated. You know, if you do, for two reasons. One, you're less likely to be, you know, to suffer, and the suffering is going to be smaller than if you do nothing. And I'm not talking about just having a written policy and putting it in the drawer. I have had one or two, not a lot, but a few clients who have done that to their peril. And the other thing is training that Chris just mentioned. That cannot be overstated. It's just critical to create a culture within your organization of awareness. And like, we're in this together, just like we were in this together for the most part, you know, despite political fractioning or whatever during the pandemic. We are really in this together with respect to cybersecurity, and that your employees are your weakest links. You are your organization's weakest link. So doing that training, you know, testing folks on their, you know, on phishing, and are they going to click on the thing or download the attachment or enter their credentials into the, you know, the false site or whatever. That's critical for training, for awareness, and it's Chris, I'm sure you've seen this too with clients. It's easy to badmouth our employees and to you know, make fun of somebody for how could they even think of, you know, taking that email seriously or whatever. But we're all busy. We're all like, you know, Lucy and Ethel on the chocolate assembly line some days, and it can happen to anybody to click on something. But you really want to promote a positive culture of training and awareness where people are rewarded, and certainly, you know, sanctioning folks where necessary to put teeth into those internal policies and procedures. But even so, using things as learning exercises and not opportunities to criticize or to place blame and things like that. Training is just super critical. And if you have those programs, the written programs and the training, and a regulator comes in or a plaintiff's lawyer comes in, they're going to have a hard time blaming you for much of anything. So you're really putting yourselves in good stead in addressing that. And there was, Chris, one other question. I don't know if you have had a chance to look at that.
Is that about what kind of resources to help educate? Yep.
I'm happy to plug in some stuff in the you know, some links into the Q&A. But if you want to address that, go ahead.
Yeah, well, you do that. You know, again, we're cautious on what we recommend, but I can tell you from partnering with Know Before, I'm sure we'll actually type that out, but very cost effective. It's not that expensive per seat or per user for an annual license. A lot of times, even for small businesses, it could only be a couple $100 a year, but it's invaluable. You get hundreds of security modules, you get little games, you get ongoing phishing tests, and ones that you can actually alter and configure that are guided for your company. There's industry-based training, there's compliance training. The key thing there is you get ongoing metrics. So you can go in and look, you can see where people are failing, you can see where people are struggling. If they click on an email as your campaign, they have to take a remedial 5-minute training. They have to do it. And then it tracks all this stuff, you know, so you have a record of it. You can turn around and produce that. You know, if you have to present to your board, commission, say, hey, listen, this year, we asked you if we could purchase Know Before. We wanted to spend this money. Well, here's what happened in the last year. We started off at, you know, 35% click rate. We're now down to 6.3. It's well worth the money. So you have ongoing metrics as well for something like that. There are others out there. There are plenty of different providers. We've just found that Know Before, hands down, is kind of the industry standard. And again, it gives you security modules. So, and, you know, you could just send them out quarterly. And, you know, we encourage people not to do those 45 minutes to an hour modules, because, listen, I know I'm in cybersecurity, but I don't want to sit there and go through that at all. You know, quick 6-minute, 7-minute, quick modules, different topics are important, and it makes it a little more interactive. with some questions in there or little games. So it's just not, reading some video or something. So there are a lot of resources. That's as far as, that piece of it. But I know Sherwin is going to add stuff in there if he hasn't on a bunch of different areas.
Yeah, I just added, Chris, I did add the know before link, but also some government sites.
Mhm.
Stay Safe Online is kind of general, like for the public, but also has some business related pointers, tips, videos, and then CISA.gov. That's the federal agency that is set up for information sharing between the public sector and the private sector. They also have some business oriented resources, but any association that supports small, medium-sized businesses will have some cybersecurity page. There are sources out there, Lauren, to answer your question.
This is probably worth bringing up. So there is something that is free to you. You can do it on your own email account, you can do it on your work email account, whatever it is. There is a site called Have I Been Pwned? I could type it into the chat in a second. That way you see it. But you can go out to that site, put in your email address, and it will tell you if you've been compromised, if that email account has been compromised, where it was compromised, what breach it occurred in, what the date was, what information was taken or part of that breach, and lets you know. Kind of shocks a lot of people, but you can, even for your organization for free, you can register your domain. So, for us, Whittlesey, it's atwadvising.com. So we can put in there that we are going to be alerted if for some reason an email account atwadvising.com shows up as part of their scans, where we reported out on the dark web that we were breached. So you can get that free reporting as well. When I'm done talking, I will type that into the chat. It's a good little resource to have.
Hey, Chris, I just typed that in the chat.
Oh, okay.
And as I was there, I saw a great question from Melissa. Have you seen a lot of pushback from employees when new policies are put in place? And how do you recommend approaching that?
Oh, that's a fun one. Do you see pushback? So here's kind of the approach on it. Instead of what I say, trying to force it on people and saying the word mandatory and you have to do this, nobody likes being told what to do. We're all adults. I used to be a kindergarten teacher, but we're all just kindergartners and potty trained. And again, work in the fire service, you'll know that even worse. But what I'm getting at is nobody likes to be told what to do. They don't like to be demanded. So dishing it out and explaining it as these are security protocols we're putting in place to help protect you at the end of the day, help protect your data and help protect you from making a security oops, so to speak. When I do some trainings, I actually try and guide it towards people's personal lives. Because my thought is, if I can get you to buy in on the cybersecurity on your personal life and protect your family, it's going to kind of spill over into the corporate world, so to speak. So yes, I think people automatically, you'll never change that mentality of, man, more stuff, more policies, more procedures. But if you also spread that out, as opposed to, dumping all these documents on them and say, hey, you have to comply with this in 12 days, that's a lot. So, making sure you spread that out and kind of slowly introduce them to some of the things is also a good way to do it. But making sure that you do it in a positive way, and then just kind of pitch it that, hey, we're doing this to protect you. And also maybe you could take the onus off you. We have to do this because we have to comply with HIPAA or we have to comply with GLBA. So these are standards that we're going to have to do. So we're just kind of have to accept them and work with them. One of the things I do see is it's gotten a little bit lighter because I think cybersecurity is such a hot topic, not just for business, but also in your home lives. That people are starting to get accustomed to this. They're starting to accept that. They realize it's a reality. It's kind of how we live. So it's becoming a little easier to implement these things. I hope that helped answer.
I would just add, I used to experience that here in my firm, with some of the partners with more years of experience. who would express frustration at, why do I have to go through this patching exercise at the end or beginning of my day? I have to go get a cup of coffee, and I have, it just takes time, and can't get right to my work. And the answer is because that's how organizations are destroyed, basically. I mean, Equifax had its problems precisely because of that, just a failure to patch. And that's just the simplest thing you could do. And if you're not doing it, it's negligence, probably gross negligence. And the other thing was two-factor authentication. When we rolled that out, there was a lot of hemming and hawing, like, oh, this is so hard. It's really not that hard.
It's really not.
Literally a button on my phone. I had clicked once, it pops up automatically when it sees my face now, and I just hit the button, approve or deny. So it's really not that hard. People get used to it, and now I don't hear any complaints. And everybody also is sensitized to the fact that our clients are requiring that. So we see more and more security questionnaires with our business partners. Clients that we want to do business with may or may not do business with us if they don't like the answers to our security questions, or we're not moving quickly enough on the things they want us to tighten up in terms of controls. So I don't know what motivates, different things motivate employees differently. Obviously, some employees aren't concerned about the profitability of the business, or efficiency, or what customers think and stuff like that. But I would say do your best to find whatever it is that makes them tick and get them on your side, to pull in the direction of cybersecurity.
I am going to touch on the slide because these are good best practices. One very quick thing that we kind of talk about when it comes to security awareness, just in general, you really want to cultivate that kind of environment that encourages people to report on security incidents, or even things they may think is a security incident. Like, so for instance, with Know Before that I talked about, there's what's called a fish alert button that goes in your email. So that if you're reading an email and you're like, this looks kind of suspicious, click the button, it sends it to whoever you have pre-configured to view those. And somebody can look into them and say, yeah, this is, or this isn't. But it's a good way for reporting. One of the things that we saw in a large breach, was the person knew they opened a phishing email, but never said anything. And then 2.5 months later, the ransomware was deployed. We were able to trace it back to how it happened. And they were like, well, I didn't say anything because I thought I was going to get in trouble. Well, might be a little more trouble now because you just cost, somebody $500,000, but it's one of those things where you want to foster that culture that it's okay to report it. I would rather you come to me and send 75 emails a day, not out of fear, but just on the safe side, knowing, hey, I think I might have clicked an email. Great, we can jump on it. We can isolate this and not make this any worse, so to speak. So fostering that, awareness that it's okay to communicate to us, let us know, is so important, that you don't threaten and scare your employees, because you're really going to put yourself in a worse position. Really quick on these couple things here. These are things that you really should be doing. Cybersecurity risk assessment, or cybersecurity assessment you hear about, are absolutely just, they're just, you have to do them. Basically, that assessment is going to do a vulnerability scan to look at your network. It's going to find any kind of holes that you have. You're going to look at your policies and procedures in place, what's missing. Look at your compliance. Are you in compliance with whatever it may be? Looking at your wireless settings. Do a phishing campaign, a very sophisticated phishing campaign, so you have an idea. Looking through your vendor management. So there's a whole list of areas to do these cybersecurity assessments. And, we're finding that it's really being adopted by all industries. We're seeing them for actually a lot of education in schools now. They're big targets. Municipalities are big targets. Banks are usually pretty secure, only because of FDIC and OCC regulations. So that helps. But you're also required by GLBA to be doing that every year. So making sure that you do these cybersecurity assessments, and you get a cyber risk rating. You get an actual score. It's based off of NIST and the CIS regulations, so it's not just made up. The key thing to that is when you go and apply for cyber liability insurance and you can show to your carrier, hey, we do this on an annual basis. Here's a cyber risk score. That is huge. You're being proactive. And the more you do that, it's going to actually lower your risk premium, just like anything else. So those are extremely important to do. At least we say annually, but you know what? If you do them biannually, unless you're required by compliance regulations, that's different. The other one that's mandatory, it's not an option anymore. If you asked us 5 years ago, we'd say, yeah, you really should be doing this. No, you have to do this, is multi-factor authentication, especially on email. So the majority of ransomware and breaches, 85% of them are caused by a phishing email, okay? And with that being said, is they're becoming more sophisticated and targeted, right? They're looking at your executives, they're doing the whaling. They're not the prince trying to give you $3.1 million. They're getting in your system, sitting and monitoring your emails, and then jump in the middle of a conversation and acting as you or whomever the recipient is, and then start to really manipulate the conversation. They're becoming very believable. So by implementing multi-factor authentication on email, it basically stops 95% of attacks. So let's say you actually gave away your credentials and a hacker has them. Well, you have the second factor of authentication on your phone. So if it's 2 a.m. and you're getting alerted, is it okay if you to prove or deny getting logged in? It should be a red flag right there of, well, I'm clearly not doing email at this time of the day. Somebody might have my credentials, but it just stopped the breach from going any further, or the incident, I should say. So this is absolutely critical, not on just email, but VPN. So we're a remote workforce now. It's pretty common due to the pandemic. So when people are logging in remotely, having that second factor of authentication is really important to make sure that your employees coming in, or even some of your vendors, have that second factor, so that if it gets compromised, a hacker isn't coming in from the outside. They have to provide that second factor of authentication. Email encryption, making sure that when you're sending some of this information, that it's secure, it's encrypted. You can get that as components of Microsoft. You can purchase third-party tools. I don't want to get too far down that road, but one of the important things I point out is very simple. When you do secure email, when you hit send, it's encrypted in transit. It's encrypted when it gets to the recipient, but when it sits in your sent folder, it sits in clear text and it's open. So if you ever got compromised in an email, that sent folder contains that email that was sent encrypted, but now it's actually unencrypted in clear text, which puts you at risk. So email encryption is important. So file transfer protocols, what are we talking about? Basically, we're talking about using third-party tools to share files that are encrypted. So instead of sending them over email, use something like a Citrix share file or a Dropbox for Business, probably something else you've heard of, File Genius, things like that that are actually third-party tools that are very encrypted, secure, can work with two-factor to share information with whomever in a very secure manner. We've talked about vendor management. I'm not going to go into that. Obviously, the last one, endpoint protection. Making sure that you have these firewalls in place, but that they're not 8 years old. Are they being patched, updated, upgraded? Are they the new next-gen firewalls that are required now? Antivirus. Does it have, host-based intrusion? Are there IPS, intrusion prevention, intrusion detection? These are all key things to kind of have in place that really helps protect your perimeter and disallowing these hackers to come in. So I know that we just threw an absolutely ton of information at you in the last hour. I think you can see between Sherwin and I, we have just an absolute passion for this, talking about cybersecurity, because it is becoming so prominent. It is becoming a problem. And, not to get off topic, or I certainly don't talk politics by any means, but we are going to see an increase in this with the incident with Ukraine and Russia. We're already seeing spikes and cyber attacks. It's happening and it's going to happen. So being diligent and preventative is really the best way to approach any of this, to be quite honest with you. So we talked about this. We're really going to have to update that. Shame on us. I'm sorry, guys. Bottom line, document what you're going to follow. Look at those policies that you have already. You don't have to start from scratch. Add in whatever policies you don't have. Make sure that privacy officer is there. If you'd like, I can offer. We have WISP templates, so you're not starting from scratch. You may have no idea of like, what do I even do? Please reach out to us. We're a resource. We're here to help. But I can certainly provide those WISP templates if people would like that. We don't mind doing that. So it gives you somewhere to start. Here's our contact information. I don't have any more, but I do see 2 chats.
You got a fellow firefighter there. Westfield FD is asking you a question.
Yeah, I may or may not know people down there. When does MFA have to be in place? It should have been probably 3 years ago. It's just one of those things. Actually, we've worked with quite a few fire departments around the state with security breaches, unfortunately. And usually the biggest remediation of any incident, even if it doesn't turn into a breach, is turning on that multi-factor authentication. It's something that can be done extremely easily. One thing that people hear about, we get it all the time, because we are also a managed service provider, so we provide IT support, full IT support for clients as well as our cybersecurity division. But we hear it all the time. You're not putting that on my phone, not on my personal phone. It has zero access to any of your personal data. It cannot touch it. Like Sherwin said, it's a matter of something popping up and saying yes and no. If there's really pushback, you can have it alert them in an alternate email. You can have them call their phone or call their work phone. There's other ways around it. But having that multi-factor in place is very simple to turn on and enable and enforce. Extremely, yep, 100%. I see that. And well aware that they're accessing that remotely, right? And you know what? It's not even just you guys as volunteer fire departments. It's everybody, right? I access on my phone all the time my corporate email. So making sure that that multi-factor is on in Office 365, really what that does, to explain to people, it's a one-time setup. So it's a one-time setup, getting on your phone, you making this a trusted device, Exchange server, gotcha. Making it a trusted device. And then from there, you shouldn't be prompted to have to get 2-factor authentication every time you check your email. That's not how that works. It depends if you're doing it remotely. I don't want to get too technical, but even still, that's fine. If you have an on-site Exchange server, you can certainly tie that back. So it looks like you're in a hybrid environment. You have my information on that slide. If you want to just hit me up offline, I will gladly talk with you. We can just talk through that really quick and answer any of your questions about that. I have no problem with that for sure.
Likewise.
Yeah.
I'm just going to give it a few more
yeah.
minutes to see if anyone else has any questions. I want to thank both Sherwin and Chris for being on today. After this is all done, I will send everyone who is on the Zoom today the PowerPoint presentation for everyone to look back at. You'll also have Chris and Sherwin's information to contact them if you guys have any additional questions that you guys may have forgot or didn't want to put in the chat. That's completely fine. Thank you, Lauren.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you all. Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah,
and
that's why we're here.
An active group. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you guys for giving us the time to talk about this.
No problem. I'm going to assume nobody has any more questions. So I'm going to say have a wonderful day, everybody.
Thank
Great.
you.
You guys have a great day. Thanks for your time and be safe.
All right. Have a good day, guys.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.